We're now moving into the panel session. Now in Australia there used to be a show called The Price is Right. And at the beginning it'd be do, 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 and all the people would be cheering. They go, Jenny Jones, come on down. And we'll go, yay, she'll be running down, go, yay. We're not going to quite do that, but what I'm going to call out is the name. Well, you guys all have to cheer, and the bands, they've just gone off for a drink. Anyway. So I'm going to call up the 6 people who are panellists for today. Bev's already on her way. Laurent, are you around? And we've got Claire. Okay, I'll go quick. Claire, yep, and Jasper. And Al, I feel like I'm reading a register out. And Luke. So what we're doing is we've asked you to give us some questions and things on Slido. And so these are the questions. Marta's managing it. And magically, I don't quite know how you're doing this, but anyway. Yes, but I don't understand how that's talking to that. It's amazing. Modern technology.
Welcome to the internet.
Great. All right. So what we're going to do is not everybody's going to answer every question. So what we're not going to have is the person number 1 says this, person number 2 says this, and so on, because that can actually be quite repetitive. So what we're going to do is, first of all, ask each of the panelists to just very briefly say who they are and what they do, just so you know where they're coming from to this, and then I'll ask the questions that are coming up. And if you feel that you wish to respond to that question, just respond. And it doesn't matter if all 6 of you want to respond to a question. That's not prohibited, but it's not the format we're going to follow for each question. So perhaps if we start with you, Claire, if you just want to say who you are. And here are our mics. We're going to yep.
So hello, I'm Claire Tsang. I spoke in the second parallel session in the afternoon, the second group. I work for Historic England, and I'm an archivist. So I'm supporting about on and off 40 archaeologists and archival scientists with what was we were calling archiving, but we quickly realised is data management.
Hello, my name is Downie. I'm the head of IT for the Gurdon Institute here in the University of Cambridge. We specialise in development biology and cancer biology. Key activities are imaging and bioinformatics. So we generate and look after many terabytes of data. My responsibility is to keep it safe.
Okay, so you guys keep that one and you share that one. Yep.
Hello, I'm Bev Jones from Lincoln. I'm a classic sufferer of small institution syndrome. So I run a repository, research data management, scholarly communications, and
Now, they're not being amplified. Is everyone able to hear everybody, or do we need to ask the group to speak up a bit? Up a little bit, okay, yes, if you wouldn't mind, sorry.
The mic doesn't have to stay on the table, so if you just pick it up and speak to it as though it's a normal mic, that's fine.
I'll be brief. My name is Jasper van Dijck. I'm data steward at TU Delft.
Hello, my name is Laurent Gatto. I'm a computational biologist and a PI in systems biology here at the University of Cambridge. I'm a data champion here in Cambridge. I'm an instructor in the software and data carpentry initiatives, Software Sustainability Institute, fellow and an open activist.
My name is Luc. I work at EPFL in Switzerland, and I'm a scientific advisor. So I'm basically an internal consultant on everything open, trying to find out what the institution should start as initiatives to improve the openness of the research output.
Excellent. Okay, so we've got a range of people who come from different places, who also have different roles within their institutions. So the first question that's come up is, it's phrased as, how do we engage those who are disengaged and see RDM as pointless bureaucracy? So I don't know if that's an experience that any of you have had. I don't know, we've got somebody who's already ready to.
So one of the things we are doing is talking to researchers who might not want to talk to us, basically to the financial administration. Whenever there's a new project, a name pops up with all sorts of information, then we contact them. We contact them and start talking to them about their research. And that's the way you engage with people who you wouldn't necessarily be proactive about it. Now, the responses are varying. Some people are annoyed, why are you contacting me? And other people are enthusiastic, and there are people that you need to convince. But in order to get those who aren't necessarily already interested, you need to go towards them and find a way to figure out who is working on preferably a new project rather than halfway in between, because we heard today a lot of good research data management needs to be done in the beginning of the project.
Is there anything others wish to add to that question, or success stories they might have had? Yeah?
Yes. We found it's been quite, sorry, can you hear me?
If you just hold it closer, yeah.
Yeah. We found it quite successful. First of all, if people approach us for any reason, so for example, if somebody wants their output sorted out, we talk about data. If we're in a room with them, we talk about data for whatever reason. And the other is that we try and talk to people in their functional groups. We try and talk to people when they're with people they research with, because then they're thinking about their work rather than administration. The take home really being that people don't want to talk about data in the abstract. If you just say to people, we want to talk about your data, they're not really, they tick the box and move on. Whereas if they're thinking about their work, then they'll incorporate what you tell them into what we do.
Which is quite similar to the previous approach as well, isn't it? Yeah. So Laurent, did you want to add to that?
Maybe reformulate it in other words. Researchers often have a really big ego, and they are very keen to talk about their research because their research is obviously the most important research in the world. So if you ask them to talk about their research and give them the possibility to say how important they are and that they are the expert in the field, they will be very happy to come and talk. And that maybe is the right time to ask them questions about what about your data?
Right. Okay. Excellent. Now the next question is talking about an example of good practice, which is that UCL now considers open practices in its academic careers framework. And so the question is, have others considered doing the same, or what steps are you taking to reward researchers for this sort of behaviour, for this sort of open behaviour? Or you might wish to talk about barriers. That's another way of approaching this question. So this is about rewarding open data practice or good research data practice.
I'm not sure I have an answer for that, but it's one of the scenarios we use because in research data management workshops, we talk about what happens because I try to learn from what my researchers tell me. We had a researcher who basically lost a section of her career because she moved institutions and fell out with a researcher. And so we talk about evidencing your career by other methods and securing that evidence through other methods than outputs.
So Claire, you were talking in your talk about, sorry to put you on the spot, about a new process you're working with that you're asking your researchers to follow in terms of data practice and notation and so on. Is that tied in any way to sort of promotion or reward or anything along those lines? No? Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's,
If you could just grab the mic, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
And just hold it.
No, it's something that I said when I was speaking that today has highlighted how we're in our infancy and that we haven't been considering data sharing. So much of, unfortunately, what I was speaking about was the practicalities of organising day-to-day life. So.
Okay, well maybe that's what you're going to have to take away from the event. Has anyone else got any? Yeah, Laurent?
Oh, wonderful! UCL, really great initiative. I hadn't heard about it at UCL or anywhere else, and I'm really happy to hear about that. And I think we could even push it a little bit further and ask the funders to explicitly require engagement in open science, open data, and data management from the early onset, so that researchers that apply for a grant have to demonstrate, and not by just using fancy buzzwords, but they really have to demonstrate that they are good actors in that respect, otherwise they won't get the money. And the Office of Scholarly Communication and the Wellcome Trust have an open research pilot project here running at a university where they try to engage directly with the funders.
Yes, and in that, in our last meeting, which we just had in September, that was one of the major themes, wasn't it? The lack of reward for this behaviour is a major disincentive. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so the next question, which kind of follows on really from what Paul was asking in the last session, is there a toolkit? And you guys may not necessarily be the right people within your institution to answer this question, but is there a toolkit for how to set up a network of open access data champions in an institution? So probably you, Jasper, are the closest to that.
As far as I know, there is no specific toolkit. I only know what Marta has done in Cambridge, which we're now also going to implement in Delft, which is the closest thing I know of.
Okay, which was actually work that Rosie established here as well. Al, do you want to talk about the work with the RDM group maybe that we do here at Cambridge?
So, yes, I can only describe my own involvement.
Yep.
I'm not a practitioner, I'm not a researcher, and I would never presume to stand up in front of a population of researchers and pontificate about what is good practice. I've had some success in my position by trickling information out and just maintaining a little low-level awareness so that the subject comes up in almost every conversation in the Institute now, rather than organising a seminar or a workshop, for example, where only the choir will turn up. I'm trying to make sure that I just introduce little references to concepts that we're talking about here today in almost all the emails that I distribute to the entire population in the Institute. And I found that a successful approach. But this is because I'm not a practitioner, I can't speak on behalf of the other data champions who are researchers, and we have more crowd.
Yeah, and that, I guess that's part of the issue, isn't it? There's a lot of, I don't like the word stakeholders, but stakeholders in the game. So we do have lots of people who have an engagement, and there's that sort of hierarchy of data management and who does what in the process, and like creating it in the first place through to management and curating of it, and then preservation of it at the end. And that's all different people do these jobs. The next question is one that comes back to some of the other discussions we've already had about how can we avoid ownership of data being taken over by commercial interests. Okay, we've already had the E word. Voldemort has already been spoken of today, but does anybody have any comment on that?
Well, within the faculty I work, this is more or less a little bit of an issue when we don't know how severe it is. But when I talk to researchers about their contracts and they work with commercial data from commercial partners, you start talking about who owns this data, and as I briefly showed in the presentation as well, they don't know. And this is not just PhD students filling in, I'm not sure if I don't know. This is also people higher up the academic chain. So my advice would be make sure that it's in your contract. Of course, if you get research data from a commercial partner, it's going to be owned by that commercial partner. But if you want to make your research reproducible, you need to figure out how to do that even though you don't own the data. And that's through making the right contract at the beginning.
So I don't know how many of you work with your technology transfer officers, but I found that this is probably like a legal aspect that has to do with technology transfer to some extent. And they're not very familiar with data as a research object that they could protect or capitalize on or in any way, which is good in a way because that means as an open activist you can argue that it should be open by default, but at the same time I think they have a lot of know-how on legal aspects, and working with them and agreeing on an institutional policy would help the scientists actually understand better, I think. I don't see how libraries only can deal with this issue because it goes beyond just knowledge dissemination and management. It's also IP.
Do you want to speak, Laurent?
I think we need to be very careful here in terms of legal, who owns the data, legal aspects of the data, and sharing the data. Sharing the data on an open license, has a legal label attached to it. And all this will all depend on different institutions. They have different rules. But maybe my piece of advice to people subversive on the system is make sure that when you write your grants, when you write your grants or submit your grants, and when they are eventually accepted, hopefully, make sure that you say that the software that you write will be released on an open source license, or the data that you will produce and will share will be released under an open license. So, assuming that's what you want to do, there is a kind of a document that binds you with the funder, and often they require it. So that might be a way for me as a researcher to push my open agenda in parallel with possible legal ties.
Okay, so I think this comes back to the reward in some ways, but the question is, how can we convince administrators to offer enough time, money and support for researchers to be better at data management? We could potentially just stop that sentence at researchers, which is to offer enough time, money and support for researchers, full stop, but we're actually asking in this case to be better at data management. So it's a matter of convincing administrators. What are sort of arguments that you think might not fall on deaf ears? Yeah, Claire?
In a very small experience, we've done quite a lot on focusing on those in that there's benefits from data management in itself and improving the data and the efficiencies within the office. And so that has picked up our managers' ears there. That's my input.
Yeah, so improving efficiency, yeah?
Yeah,
So there's a cost associated with that.
Was on improving our efficiency, and so there's efficiency in creating data, but there's so efficiency in data management creates efficiency in creating data. Is what we're trying to focus on.
Any other suggestions? Yep.
Yeah, I was going to comment, I'm more trying to convince researchers that they should invest all of this, and I'm not sure it should be administration's responsibility to do it for them. So I think the administration should go one step towards the researcher if they're ready also to take some steps. I think taking away the science quality from the researchers and putting on the administration and asking them just for quantity is certainly not a good strategy, but I'd be happy to hear.
And that comes back to what Al was saying before about not wanting to presume to go and speak to the research community in that context. It is their responsibility to take ownership of this. Yeah.
Do you think there are some things that the administration can do to help streamline the process for researchers? For example, providing a library of templates and anything that will help speed up the process of engaging with the sort of documents that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Is administrators the same as management? Can I read it like that or not?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that it is quite important to have your administration on board then, because if you don't have your administration and you're trying to convince somebody and their team leader or their department head is not convinced of the added value of good research data management, and they will be viewed, their time investment will not be worth it according to their quote-unquote boss. And if that goes all the way up the chain to your, say, dean of your faculty who is not interested or doesn't view the added value of research data management, it will be very hard to enact that cultural change that you want from the bottom up. So while management doesn't necessarily, or administrators I think don't necessarily need to be active, they need to see the added value or be convinced of the added value of that. And from then on, you can start building it from the bottom up.
So what we're saying then is that it is a researcher's responsibility to take ownership of that, but in order for them to do that, we're not trying to ask them to try and individually work this out for themselves, that we should be able to provide support like templates and so on. And in order to provide that support, we then would need to provide finance for people to do that part. And to get the money to do that, we then need to make an argument about efficiency, really. Because if you're talking about senior administration, it comes down to money every single time. That's the only thing they want to know about.
I think the other thing that helps you make that case, and it comes back to the previous question a little bit, is that you have to convince the institution of the value that is in their data.
Yep.
And then they have to assert their rights over that data. And once they'll put their money where their mouth is. If they can see the value in it, then they will give the resources for it, and then we don't have any problem.
And then sometimes it might be a disaster that actually predicates that, in that, you know, something disappears and then it has to be reproduced. It's very costly.
Or somebody gets sued.
Or that. Okay, now this is a good question because we are, of course, talking in a nice little bubble, which is academia. So this question is, should we also look for possible solutions and good best practices outside academia? And perhaps if you know of any, maybe you can describe them. So we've got lots of nodding over there now.
Sorry, then.
Just to set myself up as a pantomime baddie again.
Just to be heard on the live stream, sorry, if you can, just
Sure,
call it
sorry.
like,
An example that came up in the conversation earlier was about a pharmaceutical company, for example, where in many aspects of good data management, they're achieving 100% success by complete top-down control and an iron fist. And it raises a question here: what's more important, that we achieve 100% compliance, or we achieve 50% compliance, but a much higher level of happiness with the arrangement?
Comment.
So I actually got into open data via the Open Knowledge Foundation, and I think there's been communities active in promoting open data all over the place, and especially in government and industry for at least 10, 15, 20 years. And I was so surprised that academia didn't really pick up on their good community habits and their techniques to lobby, to engage people, and I think we should look at these communities much more.
So how much do you think, I'm thinking about what you're describing, so this is something that's a good resource that other industries have taken up, and you're describing environments which are commercial where it's very much controlled. How much do you think the resistance to this whole idea is because academics do love to chant the academic freedom line, which, you know, is used for all sorts of banners, but that the idea that academia is actually a bunch of invisible colleges, and therefore to have centralised control like that is something that is actually quite actively resisted. Do you think that that might be a factor here? Complete blank. Absolutely nothing. No? Yes?
An interesting crossover starting to develop, though, in the Gurdon Institute, for example. Many of our PIs are starting to become involved in entrepreneurial ventures, and the university is very supportive of all this. And now, subject to patents and privacy and money is a big factor in decisions that we'll make about how open the data should be.
But what about research data management as a thing? Like, I mean, we're talking about open data, which is its own issue, and it's not probably part of a lot of commercial work. But good data management is part of commercial work, because otherwise you just fail. You're not a good company. So why are we not looking to those companies who are doing good data management for ways of doing data management? Or is that because we're academics and we can just reinvent the wheel? I mean, this is my question. Yeah?
Well, my experience is basically, as you said, academics reinvent the wheel there. With our IT manager in the faculty, he loves to talk about all the problems he encounters when there's a new project, and there are guidelines within the university about how to purchase IT equipment. And there's lots of examples about researchers that are just not even going to IT to buy their equipment. And the same goes for these practices, I think, that they don't want to be burdened by the rules and procedures, and that comes down to their academic freedom. They just want to move fast and do their own thing rather than be bogged down in administration or bureaucratic. That's.
Do you have something, Bev? Grab the phone.
I think sometimes when we copy models of good practice, we copy technological models. I think we copy systems. Sorry, I think we copy systems rather than I can't see how close it is. We copy people's technology rather than people's ways of doing stuff. And I think that the technology, I think we ought to learn from other things that we've done. And I don't think technology is the answer. I think it's involved in the answer. But I think if our soft systems are good enough, then the technology will fall into place afterwards. I think in our institution often research data is seen as a problem of where to put it rather than a problem of how to manage it. And I think that where to put it is the last and least thing we need to worry about.
So both of you showing interest, Stephen?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Technology is not the issue. I just wanted to add two comments to what was said before. To some extent, there is a lack of standardization, which is good. But lack of standardization in a sense that we have different data, different models, different views. So there is no size fits all. So it's very difficult to get kind of one system, like in general or even in department. But I think another point related to that is that the reward system in academia is promotes reinventing the wheel. It's all about novelty, and so to some extent, that's how academics and researchers, see their world. That's how they get promotion. That's how they value their work. It's about novel things. So maybe that also explains a little bit the difficulty.
Is that you, Frank? Did you want to say something? Luke, sorry. Did you want to say something? No. Okay. So the next question is: should we ask publishers to include data in the peer review process? Academics would be forced to manage their data well if they knew it will be reviewed. Just a comment on that. This does happen every now and then for us. We get a request for data that has been put into our repository and not yet released, but the author wants it to be able to be seen by a reviewer. Now, clearly by doing that, it's not a closed peer review process. It becomes an open peer review process, even if it was not supposed to be. So that's just something to think about. But what do people consider about this idea about asking publishers to insist that data is part of the peer review process? What are the implications, perhaps?
I would hope that journals are actually researchers, right? The editors should be researchers, the reviewers should be researchers. So at the end, it's back to the researchers. And I liked, so I invited Cassie to talk to Lausanne a couple of months ago, and she said, I would never review a manuscript if the data was not available. And if you have enough people telling this, enough people, at the end, everybody will have to disclose everything. I'm trying to convince my researchers that one day they'll be facing reviewers for whom it's going to be default, and that day their paper is going to be rejected. So I think that there will be, that's the optimistic me talking, there will be a better circle. So the journals per se can do whatever they want, but I think it's the researchers behind the journals that need to take responsibility.
Do others have opinions on this?
I think it would be a good thing because a lot of researchers just want their research result to be published. And if the publisher are going to make it mandatory to also add your data, then the way they will promote their own academic work, which is now through publications, which the journals have impact factors and how many times you're cited, all are important about how your academic work is valued. If those journals start requiring you to add your data, then it becomes more of the ingrained in the in the process that's already in place in the academic world. So I think it would be a good thing.
Sorry, that was me just whispering to myself. It's completely off topic maybe, but it almost brings to me, as coming back from an archaeological background, like the question of what is data. And so here we're talking about peer-reviewed data, and that would be presumably the result of a test and an analysis. But the archaeological data is of say two main stages: the recording of the site, which then is all the images, all the primary data, and then to the next stage, which would be the analysis stage, which then would include multiple tests, I suppose, and multiple results, and then that all gets pulled together. So I suppose what I wanted to, what's my point, is that how would then, in the archaeological, I want to throw the question back, there you go, switch away. How in the archaeological community would that then work for review of the data set? And so it can't just go attached to a journal, it is in an archive, and then if your test is the destruction, if your initial data comes from the destruction of site, how do you test that?
This comes back, I think, in some ways to the question about using social media as data. Like if you get a sort of set of Twitter feeds that you're doing an analysis of, there is problems with reproducibility, because if you then got the same set, supposedly from date X to Y, that is not the same set, because some people may have deleted some of the tweets, and so you can never actually reproduce the original data. And it's a similar sort of, even though it's a completely different thing, it's the same kind of problem. But I guess the answer to that question is if that information is made available, and if the images are made available and so on, it does give the opportunity for the reviewer to at least have sight of it and not just take the word of the author that is the case.
Yeah, I suppose it's just, envisioning suddenly envisioning suddenly the data set being so much bigger, and then so for any data set to just go along with the journal, how does that work?
So they're opening up all sorts of questions about where data is kept and how it's kept into the future. Anybody else burning on that one?
Yeah, I hate to quote Pevke as an example of best practice, and it's the second time today I've done this. But
if you could just hold the mic up.
Sorry.
Sorry.
The question they ask in the ref is, where is the research? And what they called research an investigation leading to an insight effectively shared. And if you think about your effective sharing as your output, what you're doing with the data is showing how your investigation supports your insight. And I think in any discipline you can do that, but it does translate in different ways in different disciplines, and in some it's more direct in some than others.
Okay, so the next one's a binary question, really. So it's saying which is more effective, and we might go from the end from that end to this end, and everyone can answer it. Which way you think it goes. So which is more effective for making the case for research data management? A costly disaster coupled with reputational damage, or the kudos of being seen to do good things, good research? So and this is an opinion for you guys. So it's up to you. There's no right answer here. So which one do you think would be more effective? Making the case to who, though, Paul? That's a good question. Who are we making the case to in this scenario?
Probably senior management, people who are going to pay for it.
Okay, money. It's a money people. All right. I think you've just answered your own question, but anyway. But let's see what the panel have to say. Which way do you think you vote?
Best effect if just don't let it touch the table. If it's touching the table, it's too far away from you.
Okay. I mean, just to come back to the money, I think it's an opportunity cost. So there's just so much money for research today, and whether it's increasing or decreasing, it depends on where you live. But I think nobody can give more money for this. I think it's just we need to reallocate some money from somewhere into this. That's just for the finances. Now, which one is most effective? I mean, I've seen people adopt really good research data management after a disaster. I doubt you get the same effectiveness from just goodwill or the sake of showing off. But I would hope that maybe in the future you don't need to wait until the disaster to adapt it.
Unfortunately, I think a good disaster and a drop in reputation of a quite big university would be a really good push for data management. I'm really sorry, but I think that's...
Now, if anything happens at Cambridge over the next week or two, it's got nothing to do with this conversation.
Yeah, without a doubt, a costly disaster will make sure that management starts thinking about how to prevent another one of those events.
The costly disaster definitely makes the case for management, but what management think does not directly determine what researchers do. So you've got to make both cases.
What they said, basically. Realistically, I imagine the great reward for researchers is not in public good, but more to do with the excitement of the discovery. So I think far more impact would be from the expensive disaster.
I suppose in my experience, I would say potential disaster, but it didn't for us. It wasn't a disaster, just for something very costly, and so yeah, I'll go with the disaster, even though I'd like to go with 1 or 2.
6 out of 6. I'm looking for a volunteer to have a costly disaster.
Not Cambridge in the next 2 weeks. Okay.
3 weeks time.
Okay, so this might need to be our last question. It is, if good data management means reproducible research, if that's what we mean by good data management, why do we need so much effort to engage researchers with research data management? Isn't reproducible research the goal anyway? That's an interesting question. Is reproducible research the goal? Or is publication in a fancy pants journal to get a promotion the goal? I don't know. Yep.
Sorry, are we talking about good research or successful academia?
Good question. I think we're here. It's again like the previous question. It's a query about pragmatism over hearts and minds. But would you say reproducible research is the goal?
Depends who you ask and what. But I guess the problem that these two are not aligned is the reward system that favors successful academia, successful in the frame of being a good academic, and that doesn't really align with, not necessarily align with good research. You'll be a good successful academic if you get prizes, if you get grants, if you get papers. You will not be considered a successful academic if you do reproducible research and you share everything openly.
Any other thoughts on this? Rather depressing bit to end on, really. But
So I'm assuming that reproducibility is an assumption rather than a goal. I completely forgot what I was going to say next. Sorry. So I'll come back to
okay, you're thinking time. Does anybody else have an opinion on this?
I mean, I'll follow up on this. I think it's a good comment. People say, we're going to invest way too much in this, and not all the research will be reproduced anyway. And I'm thinking, we invest so much into writing so many papers that are not read anyway. So the goal is to have a potential reproducibility of your research, but it doesn't mean it has to be reproduced. And I think that the natural selection of good or useful science being reproduced is something we should aim for, not for like reproducibility of everything. It should be potentially reproduced, but not necessarily.
Let's come back.
Yes.
Grab it.
I remember the question I was going to ask, in fact, which was I'm interested in the idea about whether reproducibility should be something that's applied to data only, or should it not start with the experiment, with the actual research itself? And I'm slightly concerned about that. Well, not concerned, but it's an interesting question. Is the more data we share, the more effectively that data is shared, will an assumption be made that the experimental work that preceded that was all accurate and precise and properly conducted? Could we end up sharing effectively bad data?
Yes, and there is some work, I presume that most of the people in this room are aware of this. There's some work that's being done to sort of break down the research process and have a peer review of different parts of the research process. So in some disciplines now you can have your methodology peer reviewed, where the journal will then say, we will publish your results regardless of what they are because the method is strong. And so even if you have null results, the fact that you've put together a good protocol is itself publish worthy, in which case you could feel confident in what produced the data. But that's it's sort of taking it another step back in the chain, which is really what we need to start doing, I think.
Just one final small comment. I think generally the majority of us, the ideology is always there, but it's the once you get into your research, it's the stress and the pressures that mean that you start chipping off those corners.
Yeah.
Well, final comment as well. Wouldn't have discussion with researchers about, okay, so what's the goal? Is it to reproduce my research? They often say, so, but what if I generate a lot of research? What are the data that I then pick from to do my research? There's a lot of data I didn't use. What am I going to do with that? So it's not only reproducibility of scientific results, it's general care for all the data that you generate, and what do you do with that? If you only select and use a portion of that, you can still publicly share all the data that you've used or generated throughout your project.
Excellent. So what we're sort of advocating is that we should allow the data to run free with the wildebeest, and then anything can come and pick it up and work with it. That is all we have time for now. I'd just like to acknowledge that this is a group of people who were very much on the fly asked to be part of this. Some of them literally only about an hour and a half ago. So I think they've done an excellent job, and please thank our wonderful panel.